Slowly, the girl's head emerged from the water, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She clutched a waterlogged backpack to her chest, her eyes wary and distrustful. She was small, and the oversized, soaked clothing made her look even more vulnerable. He watched her, a calculating gaze sweeping over her. He had read countless psychological profiles, analyzed corporate enemies, and predicted market trends, but he found her to be an enigma. Her fear was real, but so was her fierce determination. He saw a flicker of defiance in her gaze that mirrored his own. "What are you running from?" he asked, a question he would never have asked anyone else. He was a man of action, not curiosity. "That's my business," she shot back, her voice firmer than he expected. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. "On my property. Everything is my business. You broke into my home. That makes you my problem." He took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. "And as CEO of one of the largest corporations, I don't tolerate problems. I eliminate them." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I know. Just hand me over. It's better than whatever happens if they find me." She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. A strange idea, a deviation from his cold logic, struck him. "What if there was a third option?" he said, his voice now a cool, pragmatic hum. She opened her eyes, confusion mingling with a hint of hope. What do you mean?" He walked to the edge and knelt, his face now level with hers. "I can make your problem disappear. I have unlimited resources, but nothing in my world is free." She eyed him with suspicion. "I have nothing to give you." "Your freedom," he stated flatly. "Your debt, your life, all of it. I'll pay it all. In return, you will become my employee. You will live here, unseen and unheard. You will become a ghost in this mansion, a non-entity. You will work for me, and your debt will be to me. Do we have a deal?" It was a cruel offer, a golden cage presented as an escape. He expected her to refuse, to fight against the terms, but she simply stared at him, the fear replaced by a hollow desperation. You'll pay off all my debts to them, every last cent," he promised. The first real promise he had made to another person in years. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of joy. They were a bitter mix of relief and resignation. Her sister's life depended on this. She had no choice. She finally extended her trembling hand. Deal. The world of Alexander was a fortress of glass and steel, an empire built on ruthless efficiency and a chilling lack of emotion. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in his country's history, and his reputation for being a cold, unfeeling machine was well earned. He had witnessed betrayal and cruelty firsthand, not from strangers, but from his own family, turning his heart into a vault locked against all warmth. Women to him were fleeting distractions, their emotions a weakness he couldn't afford. His only solace was his mansion, a minimalist sanctuary where every detail was a testament to order and control, and at its heart was his Olympic-sized, obsidian-tiled swimming pool, a place of absolute, undisturbed peace. Until tonight, he pulled her out of the pool, her small frame surprisingly light, and led her into the mansion. The fortress of glass and steel had just acquired a new inhabitant, a fragile bird in a cage built of wealth and a chilling bargain. The mansion became a cage of gilded silence for Maya. Her world, once filled with the chaotic noise of her city and the constant fear of being hunted, was now a chillingly quiet expanse of marble floors and empty rooms. She was a ghost, just as Alexander had promised. Her days were spent in the shadows, cleaning and organizing with a meticulousness that belied her simple clothes. She was to be unseen and unheard, a part of the house's cold, pristine machinery. He was finishing his nightly laps, the rhythmic cut of his strokes through the water a metronome for his solitary existence, when a sudden splash shattered the silence. He surfaced, droplets of water running down his chiseled face, his eyes, the color of cold steel, narrowed. A figure was thrashing in the deep end, tangled in the floating lounge chairs. It was a girl, her face pale with terror, her clothes soaked and clinging to her skin. Alexander, however, found himself breaking his own rules. The ghost wasn't as invisible as he had planned. He would catch glimpses of her from his study, a fleeting shadow polishing the grand piano, a small figure tending to the potted plants in the sunroom. The way she moved, with a quiet grace and a hint of sadness, captivated him in a way his multi-million-dollar deals never could. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved with a predator's grace, pulling himself out of the water and striding to the poolside intercom. "Security!" he barked. "We have an intruder in the West Wing pool. I want her removed and handed over to the police immediately." His mansion, once a fortress, was starting to feel like a home. One evening, he found her in the sprawling, neglected garden. He had a gardener, of course, but the man had been instructed to only maintain the formal hedges and pristine lawns. Maya, however, had discovered a small, desolate patch of land behind the gazebo and was now diligently weeding it, her fingers caked with dirt. The girl, her eyes wide like a startled deer, managed to push herself to the edge. "Please, don't call the police," she pleaded, her voice a soft, desperate whisper. "They'll find me." "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of his usual sharp tone. He was about to retort with a cynical remark about the consequences of trespassing when he noticed the desperation in her eyes. It wasn't the fear of a common thief, but the profound terror of a hunted animal. Her hands, a scraped raw, trembled as she gripped the side of the pool. A long, fresh bruise snaked across her forehead. She jumped, startled, and quickly stood up, wiping her hands on her trousers. I saw the soil was good here. I thought, maybe I could plant something." Her voice was soft, like a whisper of summer wind. "Why were you in my pool?" he asked, a flicker of curiosity momentarily overriding his icy resolve. He was about to tell her to stop. This was not a part of her bargain. But then he saw the small, delicate wildflowers she had already managed to coax into life. Their vibrant colors were a shocking contrast to the sterile perfection of his manicured lawns. For the first time, he felt something akin to wonder. As their hands met, a spark, hot and unexpected, passed between them. It wasn't the fleeting electric charge of romance, but something more profound, the ignition of a new, complex bond between a man who had everything and a girl who had nothing but her life to lose. The next day, he saw her talking to his German shepherd, a massive, imposing guard dog named Titan. Titan, known for his ferocity and loyalty only to Alexander, was leaning his head into Maya's gentle hand, his tail thumping against the ground. Alexander had never seen the dog so docile. He watched as she whispered sweet nothings to the animal, her face radiating a warmth that he had never experienced. "I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the water. "I was running." He was a CEO who commanded respect and instilled fear, a man who had made a fortune by crushing his competitors. But Maya wasn't afraid of him. She simply existed, a quiet presence that was slowly, subtly, and without any fanfare, dismantling the walls he had built around his heart. The cracks were starting to show, and with each day, they grew wider. Just then, the distant wail of police sirens pierced the night. Panic flashed across her face, and without a second thought, she plunged back under the water, disappearing beneath the surface. Her actions were simple and uncalculated, but they were acts of profound kindness, a kindness he had not seen since his mother's death. He found himself thinking about her, not as his employee or a fragile debtor, but as a person. Her name, Maya. He had learned from her file, now felt like a secret he alone possessed. The desire she had first stirred in his pool was no longer a fleeting curiosity. It was a tangible, magnetic pull that drew him closer, forcing him to confront the ghost of a heart he thought he had buried forever. The serenity of Alexander's mansion was an illusion. While Maya's presence had softened its interior, a storm was brewing outside its walls. The loan sharks, a ruthless syndicate led by a man known only as the Viper, were not easily deterred. They had a singular, chilling purpose to find Maya. Their debt was not just a matter of money, it was a matter of principle. She had dared to run from them, and they couldn't afford to let that disrespect stand. Alexander's cold demeanor finally cracked. This wasn't a planned intrusion. It was a desperate act of survival. He stood there, alone with the echoing sirens, the girl's words, and the silent, shimmering water. For the first time in years, something other than detached calculation stirred within him. It was a strange, unsettling blend of curiosity and a nascent, unfamiliar desire to know more about the girl who dared to trespass on his emotional and physical sanctuary. Their network, vast and insidious, was far more complex than a simple criminal ring. It was a well-oiled machine that had its roots in the upper echelons of society. When their initial search for Maya came up empty, the Viper's men began digging deeper, a process that eventually led them to a series of shell companies and corporate records that traced back to a massive environmental disaster from a decade ago. It was a scandal that had ruined countless lives and had been meticulously covered up by powerful figures. His world was no longer in perfect order. It had been disturbed by a stranger, a poor girl, a fleeting moment of desperation, and an unexpected, potent desire that he hadn't felt for anyone. The sirens faded into the distance, but the silence they left behind was even more deafening. Alexander stared at the dark, still water of his pool, his mind a whirlwind of uncharacteristic thoughts. Who was she? Why was she so terrified? And why, against all reason, did he find himself wanting to protect her from the very police he had summoned? They finally connected the dots, discovering the truth of Maya's background. Her family was one of the many victims of that tragedy. The trauma had left them with crippling medical bills, forcing Maya to borrow from the Viper's syndicate to keep her younger sister alive. But as they uncovered this history, they also discovered something more shocking, a faint but unmistakable link between the scandal and Alexander's own family company. He dismissed his security team and walked back to the water's edge. "Come out," he said, his voice softer this time, devoid of its usual command. "They're gone." Meanwhile, Alexander's ghost, Maya, was not just a quiet presence anymore. She was a constant, unsettling thought in his mind. He found himself thinking about her when he was supposed to be in meetings, a rare lapse in his formidable concentration. He had the best security money could buy, yet he felt an irrational fear for her safety. His possessive instinct, a trait he usually reserved for his business ventures, was now fiercely focused on her. He decided to take proactive measures. He instructed his head of security, a former elite special forces operative, to launch a full-scale investigation into the Loan Shark Syndicate. "I want to know everything about them," Alexander commanded. "Their assets, their connections, their weaknesses. And I want to know why they are so desperate to find this girl." The security team worked with a quiet efficiency that matched Alexander's. They were accustomed to his cold demands. But this time, the urgency in his voice was different. They soon discovered the Viper's syndicate was no mere criminal enterprise. It was a front for a much larger, more sinister operation that provided a means for the powerful to exploit the vulnerable. As the investigation unfolded, they uncovered a hidden trail of money, blackmail, and coercion that led directly to the very corporate scandal the loan sharks had been investigating. The chilling truth slowly came into focus. The environmental disaster that had destroyed Maya's family was not an accident but a deliberate act of sabotage, orchestrated by a rival corporation to weaken his family's company. The loan sharks were merely pawns, used to silence and exploit the victims. But the deepest, most shocking secret was yet to be revealed. The paper trail, the coded messages, and the concealed bank accounts all pointed to a single traitor within Alexander's own company, a person who had betrayed his father and ultimately caused his mother's death. The same person who was now hunting Maya, the shadow of the past, a darkness Alexander thought he had escaped, was now encroaching on the present. And at the heart of this web of deceit and betrayal was the very girl who had crashed into his life and ignited a desire he could no longer deny. He now understood that this was no coincidence. It was a twisted, intricate game, and Maya was the ultimate prize. Alexander's world, once a perfectly ordered machine, was now a chessboard with pieces moving against him, all because of the girl who had tumbled into his life. His head of security, a man named Ethan, delivered the final, damning report in a cold, sterile briefing room. The evidence was irrefutable. The hidden trail of funds, the encrypted communications, and the orchestrated attacks all pointed to one person, the mastermind behind everything. The corporate espionage, the environmental disaster 10 years ago, even the recent attacks on Maya, it's your uncle. Mr. Kang, Ethan stated, his voice flat with professional detachment. He orchestrated the entire thing to weaken your father's company. He was also the one who colluded with the rival firm. Alexander felt as if the room had tilted on its axis. His uncle, the man who had been a father figure to him after his own father's death, the one who had guided him into the world of business, was a viper in his own house. The betrayal cut deeper than any corporate loss ever could. He remembered the day his mother died, a sudden, tragic heart attack. His uncle had been the one to comfort him, to tell him to be strong. But now, as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Alexander saw the chilling truth. His mother's death wasn't a natural tragedy. It was the direct result of the stress and shock from discovering her brother-in-law's treachery. The very man who had been her confidant had been stabbing her in the back. The revelation was a double-edged sword. It provided the answer to his family's long-buried pain. But it also presented a terrifying new threat. Alexander's uncle, sensing that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling, made his move. He knew of Alexander's growing affection for Maya. To him, Maya was no longer a victim. She was leverage. Meanwhile, Maya was unaware of the storm gathering around her. She was in the garden, planting the last of the autumn bulbs, when she received a call from a strange, blocked number. A soft voice, one she vaguely recognized from a distant memory, spoke. "Maya, it's me, your sister's doctor. Your sister. She's had a sudden relapse. We need you here immediately. It's urgent." Panic seized her. She dropped the gardening trowel and ran inside, her mind clouded with fear. She didn't hesitate to take the car that was waiting for her at the front gate, a sleek black sedan that looked like it belonged to Alexander's security fleet. It was a perfect trap. As she was being driven away, a second call came, this time from Alexander's security team. "Ms. Maya, you must return to the house immediately. Do not trust anyone who comes for you." But it was too late. The car, instead of heading towards the hospital, was turning down a desolate, forested road. In his study, Alexander watched a notification flash on his security system. The car carrying Maya had gone off-route. He slammed his hand down on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "He has her," Alexander growled, his voice a lethal whisper. For the first time, his usual cold, calculated rage was replaced by a fire of pure, unadulterated fear. He had found a reason to love, a reason to feel, and now, that very reason was being used against him. Maya's mind raced, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The sleek black car sped down a lonely, winding road, far from the city lights. The doctor, on the phone, a voice she couldn't quite place, had been a perfect illusion. It was a trap, and she had walked right into it. Panic, cold and absolute, washed over her as she realized the true purpose of her abduction. It wasn't just about her, it was about Alexander. At the other end of the line, Alexander's world had narrowed to a single, terrifying focus: finding Maya. He had already dispatched his most elite team of private investigators and security personnel. He was tracking the vehicle's GPS, watching its progress with a lethal intensity. He had spent his life building an empire on cold logic. But now, logic had failed him. His love for her, a feeling he hadn't even fully acknowledged until this moment, was a weakness his enemy had exploited with ruthless precision. He received a chilling call. It was a blocked number, just like the one Maya had received. "Alexander," the voice on the other end said, a familiar, smooth baritone that made his blood run cold. It was his uncle. "I see you've been digging into my past. A dangerous hobby. It seems we both have something the other desires. You have my freedom, and I have your little pet." Alexander's knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone. "Don't you dare touch her!" he hissed, the threat in his voice as sharp as broken glass. His uncle chuckled, a sound that grated on Alexander's nerves. "She's a fragile thing. Isn't she so easily manipulated? I told her you were using her, that you'd pay off her debt just to keep her as a toy. She almost believed me. It's funny how easily people's trust is broken. Isn't it?" The lie, a twisted mockery of the truth, was a calculated blow. Alexander knew his uncle would try to poison Maya's mind, to break her spirit before he broke her. "You won't get away with this," Alexander declared, his voice a low, furious rumble. "Oh, but I already have. You have a choice, Alexander. The evidence against me, or her life. You have 1 hour to decide. After that, all bets are off." The line went dead. Alexander's mind, a complex processor of data and strategy, was now consumed by a single, desperate thought: save Maya. He had spent his life building his reputation and his wealth. But in that moment, none of it mattered. He would burn down his entire empire if it meant saving her. He was no longer the cold and detached CEO. He was a man consumed by love, fear, and a burning need for revenge against the man who had ruined his family and was now threatening to take the only light he had found. He had 1 hour to track his uncle, to rescue Maya, and to dismantle a lifetime of betrayal and lies. The ultimate game had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. The clock in Alexander's office ticked with a merciless rhythm, each second a hammer blow against his sanity. The GPS signal from the stolen vehicle led him to an old abandoned factory on the outskirts of the city, a place where secrets were buried and deals were made in the dark. He knew this was a trap, a game his uncle had designed for a final, twisted confrontation. But Alexander wasn't a man to run from a fight, especially not when Maya's life hung in the balance. He arrived with a small, elite team of his most trusted men, leaving the police and media to handle the evidence against his uncle. His focus was singular, his mind a steel trap. As they breached the factory, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay, they moved with a silent, deadly efficiency. Alexander, at the head of the formation, his face a mask of cold fury, was no longer just a CEO. He was a man on a mission, his love for Maya fueling a primal, protective rage. They found Maya tied to a chair in the center of the vast, empty factory floor. Her face was tear-streaked, but her eyes, when they met Alexander's, held a flicker of hope. Across from her stood his uncle, a smirk on his face, holding a lit cigarette. Well, if it isn't the prodigal nephew, his uncle sneered. So predictable. Sacrificing your reputation for a worthless girl. You're just like your father, weak and sentimental. Alexander ignored the taunt, his eyes locked on Maya. This ends here, uncle, he said, his voice as hard as stone. The police have all the evidence. You're finished. The uncle's smirk wavered, but he quickly regained his composure. Perhaps, but first, you'll watch your little savior's world crumble, just like mine did. He reached for a control panel, his finger hovering over a button. This button detonates a series of explosive devices I've hidden throughout this building. You'll have to choose. Save your little pet, or get the evidence to the police and let justice be served. You can't have both. A piercing alarm shrieked, and a digital timer on the panel began to count down. The factory doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. Alexander, without a moment's hesitation, sprang into action. He didn't rush to the panel. Instead, he lunged at a large, rusted steel girder and, with a superhuman effort born of pure adrenaline, pried it away from the wall, sending it crashing to the ground and blocking the uncle's path. His team engaged the uncle's henchmen in a brutal fight. Alexander, ignoring the chaos, ran towards Maya, who was now screaming. Her chair was rigged to an intricate series of wires. As the timer ticked down, Alexander worked feverishly to disconnect the wires. His hands, usually so steady, trembled with a desperate urgency. He finally freed her, the last wire snapping just as the timer hit a chilling 10 seconds. He pulled her into his arms, shielding her with his body as the first explosion rocked the building. The floor beneath them buckled, and debris rained down. He held her tight, his love for her a physical shield against the chaos. They managed to escape just as the entire building collapsed behind them. They were safe, but his uncle, consumed by his own defeat and rage, had perished in the blaze. The fire, the final, desperate act of a man who had lost everything, was a grim and fitting end to his reign of terror.